Hello, this is Let's Talk About Myths, baby, and I'm here with a quick introduction. You'll hear, I start today's conversation episode by attempting to actually do the introduction in the episode, because I'm trying to do that now so that I don't have this extra piece. All to say, there's going to be a double me singing that song. But I am here with this extra introduction because I just listened back to this episode and so many things are happening. So I spoke today with Dr. Christie Vogler, who is a returning guest and who studies medicine in the ancient world, but specifically how medicine interacts with women in varied ways. And so this conversation, if you can believe it, is fucking fascinating. It's also only part one because we talked for an hour and a half and only got through half of what we wanted to say. And it's really good and really powerful. I can't wait for you to hear both parts. But I have to share that since we recorded this on January 24th, which is just like really relevant because we were both slightly unhinged. We'd just watched a Nazi salute performed at an inauguration. And everything else that happened over the 3 days in between us recording and the fascist inauguration into the United States. And so it's just like there's a lot happening here. But Christie is also the host of one of the hosts of the podcast Movies We Dig, which I have been on a couple of times. It's a really fun show with a bunch of historians and archaeologists who break down movies featuring the ancient world. And it's really fun. It's mostly about kind of appreciation and understanding the reception of it. But that's all to say, Movies We Dig is going to be the second podcast joining my new collective/podcast network. So more on this to come. I mentioned it a little bit on Tuesday, but Michaela and I are founding something called Mnemosyne, or the Memory Collective. And that is going to be a collective of people like us and like Christie and like the wonderful people behind Sweet Bitter that I mentioned on Tuesday, people who are trying to look and share history with the public that is recognizing the impact that the patriarchal structure has had on that history in varied ways. You can find more information at collectivemem.com. I couldn't get Memory Collective or Collective Memories. Collectivemem.com. I'll link in the episode's description. You can find more information about what we're doing, but we're starting with a kind of a podcast network, bringing in some people doing interesting stuff and who are indie and could use a podcast network. So we're working on that. Movies We Dig is one of those, but it's also, this collective is based in such similar ideas to what this episode is today that I wanted to make sure that I shared it all with you. We will be having more news as things come out. We are building this from scratch with absolutely zero funding because anyway, there's no guaranteed money in the podcast right now. And so we're figuring it out. It's going to be slow, but it's going to be really fucking good and really necessary. And really necessary. So today's episode just means a lot. It's a good introduction to Christie. We're going to be working together, hopefully on a lot of other new things, hopefully more podcasts, because there's so much to say, and I really want to be able to bring more of this information, more than I can do just on this show. So there's going to be a lot more of that coming. And until then, please enjoy this God's ancient history of medicine, Hippocratic medicine, women in medicine, and stay tuned because next week we got another big one, and it just got more interesting, more infuriating, and more, I want to say empowering, but that's because I mean empowering today, because Rage is a good fuel, particularly when you're fighting fascism. Conversations othering women in the history of Western medicine with Dr. Christie Vogler, Part 1. Hello, this is Let's Talk About Myths, baby. And I am your host, Liv, for the first time recording an introduction in front of a guest.
Woo!
Because, woo is right, because it's a guest that I can inflict this upon. Thank you. I am here with Christie Vogler, returning to talk all things. Now I'm going to be like, should I just say medicine? I'm excited.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're at is we're talking medicine. We're talking Hippocratic medicine.
Ooh, yeah. And so to the listeners, Christie was on the show years ago now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might have been 2 or 3. Time is so weird. Talking about women in medicine and specifically medica and like that kind of line between witchcraft and medicine purely because ladies are involved. But then, you and offline, when you and I were talking about so many more things that maybe one day we'll talk about more publicly. But in the meantime, you have so much more. And then you wrote a 20-page outline because you're awesome and have a very different brain than mine. And I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Yeah. No, I listened to our original conversation, and I think you kept it in there. It's like I mentioned scrolling through a 15-page outline last time, and I like outline.
I love it. I have like this brain that wants to love outlines, but I also I cannot. And also I love that in your email you were like, you don't have to look at this. You could keep it a surprise. And I'm like, I appreciate that because it allows me to not feel like I've failed.
Yeah. No, it's purely for me because I like having a game plan and then I like ignoring my game plan. But if I need to get back on track, there's the game plan.
It's there.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, it worked out great for the live recording that we did with Movies We Dig, your other podcast, just to promote it right in there.
Yeah.
So your outline.
Yeah, that was my first big planning project for podcasts and involved 6 of us?
Yes. That was huge.
Yeah.
Which was so fun.
Yeah. We're planning to do it again. Either soon or definitely for International Podcast Day again, because
it's a good excuse.
There's a holiday. Why not?
It's a good excuse to really work towards it. So Well, I'm excited for that whenever it does happen. And in the meantime, I mean, Hippocratic medicine. So are you looking at Greece? Like, I don't know where to begin. Also, like, obviously I want to focus on Greece, but I know you typically focus more on Rome. So like, what's happening?
Okay, so last time we spoke, and I was talking about the intersection of magic and medicine.
That's the title. Thank you for remembering it and name dropping it right here.
Yeah, just to help it out. And what I was kind of talking about that was the medical pluralism that exists in the ancient world. And yes, my research really focuses on the Roman Empire in terms of like the site I dug at and the artifacts I specifically was looking at. But as an archaeologist, we love this thing called context. And so to understand, female medical practices, you have to study everything from like, okay, what is midwifery? What are actually magicians? What is the Hippocratic corpus? And where do people fit into all of these different ideas that exist in the ancient world? And strangely enough, Hippocrates and his supposed writings is what has, it's really scary to think about because we call Hippocrates the father of medicine and sometimes modern medicine. And if you think about that, he was writing late 5th, early 4th century, supposedly. And our medicine did not change for over 2,000 years.
Oh my God.
The same kinds of treatments that Hippocrates was using is the same treatments that were used in the Civil War, and they were called heroic treatments. That was like bloodletting and things like that. And we literally just, Western medicine did not really change until we discovered germs.
I learn these things and I'm like, I wish I was surprised. But the West is just they had such a hard on for ancient Greece.
Yeah.
They were like, these people invented everything. It's like just on its face so silly to think that like we can't evolve past. It's how I feel. This is maybe taking it too dark, but it's how I feel about what we call democracy. People have to get mad at me for saying this. Like, I'm not saying that the rule of the people is bad. I'm saying that the form of democracy that the ancient Greeks invented was not actually the rule of the people, and it's problematic. And this idea that in 2,500 years we've decided that there is nothing better than this one thing invented 2,500 years ago is fucking wild to me. And it sounds like that with the medicine, like this idea that like they knew all. We don't need to research. We don't need to go any further.
Yeah.
Let's just cut them open and hope for the best.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And like, oh man. Okay. So, you know, in some ways I'm going to present kind of a simplified version because there's so much involved, and it's, on the other hand, I got lost in my own thoughts there.
I get it.
On the other hand, it's a lot of these ideas still make sense to us. Like a lot, so like Galen, you know, who kind of codified what he thought was the most important parts of the Hippocratic corpus. His whole approach to treating people is like, okay, first thing first, start with diet, then start with regimen. Like, what's your daily exercise look like? Then maybe we try some medications. And as a last resort, you go to surgery. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like your approach to treating someone, you want to be less invasive. You want, you know, to deal with certain illness in a very
overall, like health overall versus specifically. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like a lot of these approaches make sense in some ways. Like some things haven't changed, and you know, some of it's really intuitive. I liked I think Jane Draycott just kind of talked about how, you know, Roman children would have been raised with an understanding of like health and how to maintain health, right? When you're a little kid and your parents tell you not to eat that, what do they say? Because it'll make you sick, right? And so it's like there are these ideas that are just, what have humans done for millennia to maintain health? And so it's like on some level that makes sense.
Of course. Well, I think that's the problem, is like when we don't pick out the other stuff, right? Because that's what makes it, I feel like that's what gets dangerous, is because when a large part of it is intuitive and obvious and like, yes, definitely all of this is right. And then it's like, but then we have this like blockage. So it's like, well, then everything must be right. Like leeches.
Yep. Yes. And we'll get into like some of the issues that the medical corpus has created about our intuitive sense of things, especially when it comes to women's bodies, because basically, again, very simplified, and we'll get into it. Hippocratic medicine is mostly based on the premise that the body that you are dealing with is the ideal, normal, air quotes, male body.
Naturally.
Right?
Yeah.
The moment you switch to a woman, well, it's already defective because it has a thing called the uterus. And the uterus does this really, really scary thing where it bleeds once a month and the woman doesn't die. What is with that? Right?
And so it's wrong, obviously. The bodies are not the norm.
Exactly. So when this entire corpus, this long-standing history of Western medicine is kind of really built for one size fits all.
That part hasn't changed.
It has not changed.
Well, I think there's some parts that are working on it now, but like,
yep. Yeah. So like,
do you ever, sorry, just because this is like a modern thing I think about all the time now, is like how like every type of medication or every type, like literally anything, you know, there's so many things that they'll say like, do not use if you're pregnant. And it's not because they know it would harm you or the baby. It's because they just don't test on pregnant people like ever. So it's just like, just don't, not because it's actually a problem, but simply because we don't care to check.
Yep. Yes. And that, you know, kind of a later problem that stemmed from is like women weren't tested in a lot of things for a long time. Like even if they weren't pregnant, because scientists would rather presume like, but what if you were? Or what if this affects your ability to get pregnant? Therefore, we're just not going to test on women.
Well, yeah, because the womb as the growth mechanism is really all they care about. They don't actually care about the human body. Oh, I wonder what we're talking about. That's fine. Everything's bad. But like, yeah, it's just so wild because truly it is this constant reminder throughout all of history and up until right this very moment that like the really only concern for the female body, and I say that like people with the uterus, like the concern is simply that they can create more men. It's not that they are a body being lived in by a human being equal to a man.
Mm-hmm.
It's that we need to be concerned with whether or not they are capable of creating more men.
Yeah. Yeah. And yes, that is what this conversation is going to be about for sure. But I also wanted to kind of think back on, so last time I talked to you, I brought up like 3 different passages. One was the story of Aeneas getting healed by his mother Venus, but also the surgeon Iapix, who's, performing surgery on him. And another one is the story of Agnodike, who all of these women were dying during childbirth. So she disguised herself as a man and got training, and she started saving the lives of women. And what I liked about both those stories is that the reason Iapix became a healer is he wanted to take care of his elderly father. The reason Agnodike went through this huge deception and training and facing the court was she wanted to save the lives of the women in her community.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's an atheological story. We don't think that's historical fact any more than we think. Venus carrying her son Aeneas is historical fact. But what those stories show, and I think why medicine is so important, is that the people who are in medicine, I think a lot of them do it because they do. They want to take care of the people in their lives, in their community. And what's hard is that in order to legitimize and push the knowledge and advancement of those individuals to save people's lives is you have to create this institution. And this institution has very different goals than what the individuals within it might have. And so it's like, I do want to posit that because I know from last time, it's like we definitely had like nurse practitioners and other people involved in healthcare. They're part of the system. And I think we have a love-hate relationship with healthcare. And I do want to just point out that like the individuals involved, there are people who actually care and want to use all of this history and all of this knowledge to help people, which is, I think, important to appreciate. So
absolutely. No, that's, yeah. Thank you for saying that. Because it's hard. You get caught up in the system because the system is so oppressive that it is easy to get stuck in that versus thinking of, these individual people who actually are just out to do good. And unfortunately, sometimes the system is stopping them or preventing them or just like manipulating the way that we are seeing, that we understand what is, help. But it is, primarily the system that's the issue. And that's like, it's funny to talk about that. Like, I'm sure far worse for you as an American, but it's funny to talk about this system as like this system, the overarching system itself. And like, we're not even getting into like the actual individual, like system in terms of how it hurts people, but even just like the broader idea of learning about healthcare and the evolution of it or lack thereof over the last 2,000 years.
Yeah. And that's kind of where my research was coming from and what helps me feel a little bit more grounded in it. Cause it's like, I'm working from the assumption that, okay, here is likely a woman at this villa in Ganjavecchio who appears to be practicing medicine. What does that look like? What are all of these things happening around her that are impacting the way that she is interacting with her patients? And, so I started at the very individual level and then you go into everything that is around that. And that's when it gets, I don't know, I feel like I was holding my breath for a moment. It's like, we have to dive in to so much craziness. And it feels sometimes like where to begin. And I think that's kind of what I realized from our last episode. I panicked actually, because it's like I've given 2 more presentations, an invited lecture, and I've taught a history of medicine course twice since the last time I talked to you. And it's like, surely I have new things to say. And then I re-listened to the episode. I'm like, oh no, I've said,
You're like, I said so much.
did I say it all? I forget that, like, you know, conference presentations are 15, 20 minutes in length, and we talked for like an hour.
It's so funny for me to hear that because, like, I don't do any of that side of it. I just love these conversations, and I can get these experts to talk for so long, but I've never thought about it like that. I'm also like exhausting knowledge in certain ways.
So I was like panicked. I'm like, oh no, what will I do? Do I have anything new to say about Medica? And I'm like, okay, yes, I do. But I also realized that, you know, when we were talking about rational medicine, biomedicine, I didn't really get into what is Hippocratic medicine and, you know, why we did talk about how, like, women who practice more folk medicine, like how they're kind of being stigmatized as a competition, as something opposite of that. But then what I'm looking at is women who decide they want to enter into that system and practice medicine in that manner. And I'm really curious why not just be a May-I? Why not just be a healer, wise woman or something like that? Why choose this path? And so that was kind of the question I was coming from. It's like, okay, we got to talk about Hippocrates. We got to think about, why do these women decide to enter a realm of medicine that has eventually been gendered male? And then the other big question, and this is what I had been covering mostly, is who's listening to that woman? Like, what authority as a physician does she have to tell a patient, you need to do this? And, you know, if you think about that, that's really interesting, because a lot of these individuals are women, for one thing. A lot of them are of former slave status or slaves themselves. And so who does that Medica get to treat? How seriously will that patient take her? Because the other kind of interesting thing to talk about is, as a patient, you have a lot of agency. You don't have to listen to a doctor and follow their directions. You do get to choose if you're going to take your aunt's recipe over some guy trained in Alexandria, right? And I thought that was a really interesting question too, is like, this role has a certain level of authority to it, which I think is also appealing to women in ways that, like, a service job of like doing hair or you know, weaving or something, you don't have that kind of authority over another person. So that was kind of one of the other ideas I've been exploring more recently. So all that to say is, like, that's what we're going to try and cover today. And I'm sure it'll be a winding path, but yeah.
No, I mean, I love all of that. I'm trying to decide, like, where, I mean, you have your outline too, which is great because I just want to hear everything. But yeah, why don't we start with like a little bit on this Hippocrates guy? Because I'll admit that my knowledge of him is pretty highly based on Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which means it's not great, but also, you know, could be worse.
It could be worse. That's I forgot Hippocrates is in that game. And
there's a bunch of little quests with him. Hippocrates.
You know, okay, so yeah, let's talk about Hippocrates of Kos, born circa 460 BCE and died around 375 BCE. As I mentioned, so unless you play Assassin's Creed Odyssey, the only other time most people have heard about Hippocrates is the Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah.
Because it's something that doctors still take today. They take a different version of it, but that's usually how they know this guy. And as I mentioned, he is often referred to as the father of medicine or modern medicine. Here's the thing. We barely know anything about him. Like, he is almost on the level of Homer in my mind, except we have like some contemporaries who talk about him. So it's we know he was probably a real person.
Yeah. Like Socrates is what I'm imagining.
Yes, very much so. And the funny thing is like, even though his name is on the oath, it is very unlikely he actually wrote the oath, because what made him interesting is that he started teaching people about medicine for payment. And the reason like that's a big deal is because usually you kept that knowledge within the family. So the oath actually has a prohibition against teaching people medicine for payment, because that means you're basically sharing this knowledge outside of the family.
It's
And
ironic today.
right? Yeah, it's a whole different thing. And yet,
Yeah.
you know, you've got families of doctors too. Like it is
Yeah.
a weird thing. But yeah, so we know very clearly that Hippocrates, you know, didn't follow at least one of the tenets of the oath that he is
Yeah.
supposedly had authored.
That's funny.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So what we do know, again, he originates from Kos, which is a Greek island, part of the Dodecanese, which is in the southeast Aegean Sea near modern day Turkey. And then we do have a group of letters and speeches dating to around 350 BCE, which depict him as a wise sage, a patriot who refused to take Persian gold and serve their king, and a wonderfully versatile doctor capable of treating both a monarch's love sickness and the Great Plague of Athens, which I don't know if he cured the Plague of Athens.
In Assassin's Creed Odyssey, he helped, and so did Cassandra. So.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, it's canon.
Great. Literally, and by helped, I mean you go and you like just have to throw a bunch of bodies on the fire because Hippocrates tells you to. But still.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh. Yeah. So
do we have his writing? Sorry, just to like maybe guide along.
So we're going back to Socrates in that case, right?
Okay,
we don't know of what we call the Hippocratic corpus. We don't know of like if he authored any of it, if his students authored it, or if people just using the name because it became popular with medicine authored it. And yeah, let's see. I think he's also mentioned, Plato actually talks about him. Okay. And we learn from Plato that Hippocrates was an Asclepiad, meaning he was supposedly descended from Asclepius, which also legitimizes his role as a healer.
Yeah.
And he's one of the ones that tells us that he's teaching medicine for money. So, so again,
Plato causes so much trouble about figuring out what is an actual ancient fact and what is just like him making shit up.
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting is it is likely that Hippocrates, or the writings of Hippocrates and his students, was popularly known in Athens because there's this great article, I forget who wrote it, I'll have to come back to that. There are plays where a character goes mad, so Euripides' Heracles, and if you listen to the description, I have to find it. If you listen to the description of what this madness supposedly looks like, it is very similar to descriptions from On the Sacred Disease, which is about epilepsy, of what symptoms of epilepsy look like. So there's a line in Euripides' Heracles where Madness is talking to Iris, the messenger goddess. And she says, "Behold him, see how even now he is wildly tossing his head at the outset, rolling his eyes fiercely from side to side without a word, nor can he control his panting breath. Like a fearful bull in act to charge, he bellows, calling on the goddess of nether hell."
Oh, I love Euripides so much. I haven't covered that play, but it's I need to.
Yeah. And so, like, it's been pointed out, it's like this language shows that, like, these playwrights are reading or aware of Hippocratic texts because they're using that as inspiration in their plays as descriptors. Yeah. So it definitely seems that, like, it's not just Plato. It's like other people are aware that this corpus exists and they're engaging with it in some manner.
That's really interesting. I bet you there's stuff in Orestes too that would kind of have similar.
Yeah, there's a few different examples. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought that was just a cool, and I had sent you earlier, I sent you clips, right, of different TV shows, Domina and HBO's Rome, that are very much taking like, oh, here is how medicine is described. We're going to play it out in our show for entertainment and for drama. And
I only watched half of the one from HBO's Rome because I went, I
know.
That's okay. Well, okay, I get the point.
That one's great for two reasons. One, it illustrates how public treatment
Yeah.
was.
To the
Like,
listeners, which I can link to it too, but
mhm,
basically one of the characters in Rome, Titus Pullo, everyone's favorite,
mhm,
is getting essentially brain surgery in someone's house in front of a crowd
yeah,
while he's awake.
yeah,
That's the most you need to know. Wow.
yeah. And so, it kind of highlights this point that like doctors are craftspeople. They're not, for the most part, they're not elites, and they have a business to run. So they
Yeah.
perform in front of an audience, which I love that aspect. And then towards the end of the clip, when the doctor is leaving and he's explaining directions of like, expect this and this and this, and then he turns and goes, "Oh, maybe sacrifice a white rabbit to this deity." That helps sometimes. And I
Yeah.
love that because it's a great example of like, the doctors are supposedly being all rational. It's like, but if it makes you feel better,
Yeah. Like just in case.
yeah,
Couldn't hurt.
yeah, cover your bases.
Yeah. I
And I
like
love it
that.
because it's such a great example of, yeah, patients would feel very reassured if a doctor is like, okay, do this and this and this, but also, talk to the gods, see what they can do for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Well, it
And-
reminds me of like, I mean, the, that this is, I mean, maybe it's still connected in ways I don't know, but just going back to Hippocrates as like a child of Asclepius or a
Mhm,
relation of Asclepius,
mhm,
like before they had, that side of early medicine, they were relying on the gods and relying on Asclepius. And there's all these incredible pieces from Asclepian temples where
yeah,
people would leave like dedications in thanks or in prayer for healing of like their different body parts and stuff. And so I imagine like, for a long time with this transition to medicine in any kind of form, like you're still dealing with people who are very tied to their deities, who trust their deities, and like you need that kind of balance, even if it's just for
mhm,
that almost the what's the word I want, of like a placebo effect, right? Of like
mhm,
going
yes,
for that aspect that gives you comfort culturally, and that
mhm.
makes a big difference.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. That's a what could arguably be a major shift with Hippocratic medicine is the idea of like illness has some kind of rational explanation. It's not caused by supernatural things like the gods. So like if
Hmm.
you were going based just on the corpus, you would think that like they like the healing cults and these other protective amulets and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
You think doctors would just totally be like, ignore all of that. No, they are actually partnering with these healing cults to legitimize their own practice because we see things like dedications of plaques or surgeons' tools or things like that from doctors to Asclepius.
Hmm.
We also know that later in the Roman period, they formed these things called collegia, which are like fraternities or clubs for different professions. And one of the things that the doctors' collegia does is they apparently, and I don't know what this looks like, hold a contest of doctoring during the festival of Asclepius. And I'm like, what does that look like? Like you get a bunch of
Yeah.
people that need stitches and you see like who does the best?
Who's
Like,
our best? Yeah, that's both fascinating and terrifying to imagine. Like, I feel like it could go many ways.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I like that. Well, I mean, it's, yeah, just to relate it to modernity, like, people don't take that well to, particularly intellectual people coming in and saying you need to do this thing because of all of these science reasons, like
Mm-hmm.
get vaccinated, like there's
Mm-hmm.
still there's people don't like to have their knowledge questioned or challenged, or what they believe already they don't want to have that challenge. So it's
Mm-hmm.
really smart as these early workers, like, I mean, I'm sure it's also just happening very naturally because this is just coming about culturally, but like to be still so aligned with the gods
Yeah.
was a good idea for lots of reasons, like in terms
It
of just making their point come across.
Yeah. And, again, going back to this question of authority, it's like, why would you listen to a physician versus a priest, for instance? Again, the partnering with the healing cults of Asclepius makes a lot of sense because do you know when those cults become very popular in Greece and then later in Rome? Like what major event prompts it?
Well, later in Rome. I mean, I would have assumed the Peloponnesian War, but maybe
Oh,
not.
nope, not wars. We were talking about
Okay.
earlier plague. So the plague
Oh,
of
oh, naturally,
Athens.
right,
Yeah,
right.
the plague of
Yeah.
Athens, and then later, I think about a century later, Rome starts experiences a plague that lasts about 3 years, and so they consult the Sibylline books, and they're like, "Dude, bring Asclepius over." So
Oh,
introducing the cult of
wow.
Asclepius becomes a state action and
Yeah.
has official recognition versus there is no law or certification or anything for doctors. You can
Right.
just claim that title.
Yeah. But when they really need help, they're going to bring the cult over from another culture that they've
Mm-hmm.
conquered and colonized. They're going to
Yeah.
just bring it over and be like, well, this is magic cult. We'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. And the doctors come with them because they figure it's like,
Yeah.
oh, the state recognizes this. So if we show we are associated with this, then people will
Mm.
pay for our services.
So did
And
a lot of Greek doctors come along with the cult of Asclepius then?
we see a huge, like,
Huh?
for Romans, Greek medicine is foreign. And there's actually, that's why there's an anti-Hellenism movement in Rome
Hmm.
because they don't like all of these ideas coming from the East, from the Greeks. And one of the
God's
big ones
history
is
repeats
medicine.
itself, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Ugh.
Well, and you get people like Pliny and Cato writing about how like doctors are shifty. They'll poison you and sleep with your wife.
Of course they'd go to sleep with your wife. Like, do you not have any other concerns?
Yep.
Honestly. Get your house in order.
And so you shouldn't trust them. You should do your own doctoring. Is basically like the instructions given by, that's kind of the early reaction to something that is foreign.
Yeah.
But also think about like what kind of people are being brought into Rome? Slaves with medical knowledge. Why would you listen to them? Why would you trust them? Yeah.
It's, I love this job. I love these conversations. I love connecting it to the modern time because I think it's really important. But sorry,
No, you're
alarm I
good.
forget exists. But I just like it's so exhausting. It's so exhausting seeing dumb shit from 2000 years ago just be repeated now because Western, and I'm going to say that because I mean, ultimately, I just mean the type of Western people that consider themselves so fucking descendant from things like Greece and Rome that they're like just so unable to see the value in foreign people. Like, it reminds me of like all of the immigrants from India who are full-blown doctors, but like they come to North America because they want to, and they like legit can't be doctors here. And you're like, these people are doctors. We could
Yeah.
have more doctors. Like, Canada may have free healthcare that Americans love to, brag or compare themselves, but we have no healthcare. Like, it's free, sure. If you're in an accident, you won't die, but there is so few doctors
Yeah.
and there's so little access to care that, like, if you have cancer, you're probably still fucked. You won't go bankrupt, but you might not live either. And it's like, there's just so many doctors, but we have this utter fear of foreign or like Eastern medicine and how like Chinese medicine is like fucking great and they've been doing it a really long time. And, but like the West is still so like, anyway, I also grew up in a crazy hippie household. So that's coming through here. It's just, yeah, it's wild to me I mean, I'm not surprised at all, but why can't we just like foreigners when they bring really great and valuable things? Why do we have to be scared of them because they're brown? I don't understand.
Well, especially considering the Romans forced them to come over half the time too.
Well, and then there's another country that did that too. We might call it that's the thing. Well, but that's colonialism, right? Like, I had this conversation with somebody else that's going to air probably around this time, but we were talking about the colonization broadly and like, yeah, I mean, what the utter irrationality of colonizing countries like specifically Rome and Britain and America, I will say, because Greece did not do this to the same degree. But like those specific colonizing countries and how they just sought to take over land that wasn't theirs, to steal it, to imprison, to impoverish, to destroy the lives of the people living there. And then when those people who were colonized and forced to become part of the empire, when those people then went to the like center of the empire, suddenly they're fucking hated and racism becomes what it is. And it's like, it's so lacking in rationale, which like all of, you know, obviously that's the issue with understanding it, is that like it is just evil. And so you, if you're coming at it with like empathy and a rational mind, you can't understand it. But like it's just so fucking wild. Like Rome enslaves all of these people and then has the nerve to be afraid of the fact that they have fucking skills from before they were enslaved by the empire. And it's like, you know, that country over in that place, you know, settles and colonizes land that was inhabited by other people for 2,000 plus fucking, well, 5,000 years. And then they're like, oh my God, these people keep getting angry at us for taking all of their land and stealing their houses. And they keep attacking us for I can't imagine why. We're just surrounded by enemies. And oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And it's like, well, if you hadn't killed everyone and stolen their land, you wouldn't be surrounded by enemies. But we're not going to say it like that. Like,
nope.
Anyway, back to Rome and being mad that they're enslaved people. We're good at stuff.
Yeah. Decompress a little.
They don't know how to have conversations anymore. I don't know how to do it. Everyone, this is being recorded on Friday, January 24th for context. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, and trust me, it's just going to get worse because I haven't even gotten to the women part of it yet.
Sick.
Oh, okay. So,
yeah. Sorry, I really like went off. I probably won't edit much of this out if it helps.
No,
but
it's like yeah. When I got to the end of my outline, I was so mad, and you know, we'll get to that. We'll get to it. So, okay. So when we talk about this guy Hippocrates and the Hippocratic Oath and supposedly saving or ending the plague of Athens or whatever he's doing in Assassin's Creed, usually what we're really referring to is this corpus that I've mentioned a couple times, which again we're not really sure who authored. It's unclear if any of the treatises in the Hippocratic corpus were the work of Hippocrates, students, or just others using the name, because I think we talked about that last time. Sometimes you pick a name so people will listen to you. And I think I use the example of like, supposedly there's a cosmetics manual written by Cleopatra. Yes, that Cleopatra.
Naturally.
And there's another really interesting example. There's a rare text supposedly authored by a woman, and her name's Metrodora. And it's titled On the Conditions of the Womb. It's a late antiquity work to it's dated around the 1st to 6th century CE. So it's definitely after Hippocrates.
Yeah.
And it's based on gynecological concerns. But it draws heavily on the Hippocratic corpus, which I've hinted at, like, why Hippocratic medicine's not great when it comes to women. So you have this woman writing a text that is basically just relaying very similar information to like earlier Hippocratic medicine.
Yeah.
It's the only medical text attributed to a woman author to survive from the Greco-Roman antiquity. But do you know what the name Metrodora means?
Ooh.
Dora's in there. That might help.
I know it's one I should. No, I'm not going to get it.
It's okay. It means gifts of the uterus in Greek.
Dora. Yeah. Oh my God. Oh my God. Gifts of the uterus. Okay. That reminds me that there is, one that immediately reminds me of the like quote unquote husband of Sappho, whose name is just like Man from Man Island or Dick from Man Island, something like that. And it's like, yeah, we're supposed to believe that's real. Sure. I'm sure she killed herself over a guy named Dick from Man Island. But aside from that completely, and just like for a silly thing that's so similar, there is an ancient Greek sex manual that is attributed to have been written by like a servant girl of Helen, because like it's the same thing of like just giving, who was going to be the most sexually promiscuous woman in ancient Greece? Well, it would be Helen. So obviously one of her women wrote it. Like
obviously,
yeah. Oh my God, gifts of the uterus. I cannot.
there's actually a huge argument over, is Metrodora a woman or not a woman? And it's like, it's pretty obvious the name's probably a moniker.
Yeah.
But, there have been studies done on names and how certain names like somehow drive people into certain professions that relate to it. So it's like, there's some psychology there, but more likely than not, like someone adopted the name to further legitimize the information being written down.
As someone whose name, like original given name is Alexandra Oliva and ended up in this profession, I don't know. I don't think that there's any connection to that at all.
No, not at all.
For this white girl in Canada whose parents gave her a bizarrely Greek name.
Well, and mine's like, I was born 5 days before Christmas, and like, so my name is Christy. It's like, I don't feel super Christian most of the time. And then I later learned that like Christos, it means, it's Greek for the anointed one. And I joke, it's like the oiled up one, just for fun. So.
Hell yeah.
And I'm like, maybe there's something to it. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, and even if it's just that you can find those connections later, like that's fun too, which is what I think is real with mine. Like it's, but I love it.
Oh yeah. So yeah, the claiming of the name Hippocrates probably was some dude practicing medicine back in the day, but like he just kind of became the authoritative name you throw on text, medical text, so that they get accepted. And it's pretty interesting. So I wanted to mention, I talked a lot about Vivian Newton last time, who wrote an entire book on ancient medicine. And I referred to Vivian as a she. He is not. He is a lovely, elderly British man with a very feminine name here in the United States. I got to see him give a talk
British
on
names
Galen.
sometimes.
Yeah. So I'm correcting the record on the first episode to show how we grow and learn over time.
Love it. Also, like North America, I get it. There's an awful lot of Evelyns in the UK that are men, and I go, okay, no, I'm gonna get used to that. I get it.
Yeah. Leslie, I know, is another one that yeah. So anyway, according to Newton, the Hippocratic Corpus it's made up. It's about 60 works written in the Ionic dialect of Greek, and it's the collection we have today only dates back, like have physical copies of, dates back to 1526, when the Aldine Press in Venice printed the first edition of the complete works in Greek. And it's clear from the manuscripts that a great majority of the texts printed in that year had already been circulating together under the name of Hippocrates, possibly as early as the 1st century CE, if not 300 years earlier, when Hippocrates was roaming the world or so. And what's interesting is like it is kind of a confusing collection, because it seems that it was assembled at the Library of Alexandria in Egypt, which makes sense because the island of Kos was part of the Ptolemaic Empire at that time. So that's part of the reason we still have the Hippocratic Corpus, is it was preserved at the Library of Alexandria. The other reason that we have all of this information about Hippocrates is because a lot of Greek medicine was adopted and preserved and copied by later medieval Islamic civilization.
This is something I want to find a way to talk about in like a whole fucking episode, is the way that the Muslims preserved like an enormous amount of what we have from Greece and Rome was preserved because of Islam, and we love to forget that in the West.
Yeah. Same as Homer. Like we would not have Homer if not for that. So
that's good to know. Thank you. Yeah.
So yeah, part of my history of medicine course, we do spend a long time looking at how Islamic medicine built upon the work, like what the Greeks and Romans had done with it, and preserved so much of what we still have today. They're also why we still have Hippocratic medicine until we discover germs in the late 1800s. Okay. So
they can't be all good.
Yeah, it can't be all good. It's really interesting though, because like there are case studies where the physicians in the medieval period will write about how like supposedly the Greeks and the Romans could do this thing like a tracheotomy, I don't know how. I don't think, because they forget, they lose the practical knowledge of doing some of the procedures and everything.
Yeah.
And so there was this guy who was just, it's like, and then it's kind of a tragic story. A young woman had tried to unalive herself using a knife, and she did it in such a way that allowed this physician to conveniently test a tracheotomy out. And he's like, it is possible. And that's all we get of her story.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So interesting case studies like that.
Yeah.
It is, and it's interesting because why just focusing on the Hippocratic writings is so problematic is because medicine is a practical skill.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just theory, it is practice as well.
Yeah.
And so you can preserve the theory all you want. It's how you put it into practice that matters more over time. So
yeah.
Yeah.
To get into, so, I know there's so much to talk about when it comes to, I mean, medicine broadly and women specifically, but like, so you hinted at it with the Hippocrates that just on its face, women were just like not men.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of like, yeah, like, so yeah, what was kind of going on? They just were sort of not studied or just like assumed to be this like, yeah, incorrect form of a man or what? How does that work logically when you're like, well, which one came first, buddy? Anyway,
Yep.
sorry.
Yep. Nope. That's a great question. And I have to drag Aristotle into it and natural philosophy because I don't like him. He very much complicates this idea.
Searching into Aristotle on women, and yeah, okay, I'm ready for this.
Yeah. So again, on the surface, all human bodies are basically the same. They have these things called humors, and they are hot, cold, dry, wet, and there's a balance of those within the body. But women have this really weird organ called the uterus, and if it falls out of balance, which it does all the time because women go through this monthly regular process of bleeding, that's not normal for men. So they're obviously sick all the time because of the uterus. And therefore, there is kind of this interesting question then of how would a doctor actually practically approach a female patient then? Do you operate on the base of all of these diagnoses that are the idea of the wandering womb, like your womb has gone up your chest cavity and is sucking the blood out of your brain and you're hysterical? Or
thinking back to my episode with oh shit, Helen King. I'm gonna say that again. I'm thinking back to my episode with Helen King, which is women are wet and spongy, and yeah, okay, yep. So the uterus is going all over the place. So what are they gonna do?
Yep. Or is the symptom a headache, and you just treat it like a headache, like you would with a male patient? What makes more sense? And like, that's kind of a big question because the Hippocratic corpus would be like, well, female illnesses all have to do with the uterus. And the cure for that, not great. The treatments for any complaint of the uterus, just not great for the most part. And I'll definitely get into more of that. Or do you go with the approach that in humoral pathology, it's like, oh, you have too much blood in the brain, and therefore we're going to give you a pharmaceutical treatment that reduces blood pressure or something like that. Like something maybe actually reasonable and helpful. And I don't know, that answer isn't always clear because a lot of the medical texts are focused on diagnosis, and a lot of ancient texts aren't necessarily concerned with case studies and the results. So we're told how to figure out what a problem is, but and how to treat it, but not how well that treatment works.
Right. Or whether that was the problem to begin with. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It reminds me of I think we talked about this last time, not on the podcast. I mean, because you and I just have had calls, but I think we both. Did you see Nosferatu, or were you? Going
I have not.
To see it?
I need to. Okay. It's coming on streaming soon, so like.
So there's a lot of moments that are done so well where it's just like this woman, like, is having all these health issues And they're like, well, it's very clear she has too much blood. Just get rid of some of that. Like, and that's, for half of the doctors, it's just, well, obviously she has too much blood. Yeah. And it just made me laugh every time. She's like, okay, yeah, no, sure. Yeah. I'm sure that's definitely it. And it's not just that you could have just learned a different body type. There just happened to be two. In all creatures, there are two sexes. And I'm saying, not gender sex. Like, and obviously there are still more than two, but like, come on, guys. Like, this idea that women are just like broken versions of men, even when animals have like diversity of sexes. Like, what are we doing? Why?
Yep. So yeah. So just a refresher. Here is the basic. What does Hippocratic medicine put forth as the idea? So Hippocratic medicine does cover all aspects of health of the individual, including mind and body. So it's really interesting of looking about, Galen and other people talking about stress. What is the impact of stress on the body? And, what is kind of really nice about the healing cults of Asclepius is, I asked this of my students, is like, why might you feel better going to Epidavros? You go there, you're out in the countryside, the coast, out of a big city. There's a giant theater so that you can listen to music or like decompress and be entertained. There's walking. Like, I wonder why people feel better when they go there.
Yeah.
And those are like legitimate treatments in Hippocratic medicine as well. So that's really important. And I think I mentioned it's like Hippocratic medicine, again, is like they don't believe, according to the corpus, they don't believe in divine intervention. That doesn't happen in practice. But the idea is like there is a rational, natural cause of illness. And as I mentioned before, it's like treatment usually kind of follows a particular order where you start with look at your diet and your regimen, then medication, and the last resort surgery, because surgery does not
it's a last resort now, so I can't imagine back then.
Yeah, exactly. They avoid chants, charms, and exorcisms because that falls under the realm of magic and folk medicine. Again, not necessarily happening in practice.
Right.
Because it is useful to include some of those things in your practice for the comfort of your patients, and it might convince your patients to listen to you. If like you're doing something that already they would have done,
that they're feel like,
oh, okay, my doctor knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. I love that. I just like that connection to like, you got to keep it up with the gods, because that's what that's the culture. That's like that's the world.
We still like, right? Like if someone's sick, on social media, you'll see people like ask for prayers or send prayers. Like that's still something we practice.
Yeah.
As an
my mother
would
say, send white light, because again, I grew up in a very specific household.
Exactly. But it's still the same idea, right? Like you leave room for the supernatural to do its thing, because sometimes maybe that's the little deciding factor at the end of the day. Who knows? Let's see. This is where things get dicey. It claims a basis in empirical fact and sound practice that rejects flimsy philosophical hypotheses, like Aristotle's explanation of conception and the difference between men and women. It doesn't do that. And we live with the consequences of that over time.
So it says it rejects that, but ultimately in practice, not at all.
Correct, so, right?
Like, can you remind me Aristotle on women and conception?
Okay, so basically, Aristotle's the one who kind of comes up with the idea that we also see this again in the Greek play of, what is it? The Eumenides?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the right one? When Orestes has to go and there's a trial and Athena's involved. and the Furies are basically arguing, it's like, hey, he killed his parent. It's a blood crime. Therefore, we get to harass him. And Apollo shows up and makes the argument that women are just the vessels. They don't actually contribute any matter to the embryo. And therefore, because Clytemnestra was just a vessel and that Orestes was wholly, is it Orestes? I think that's right.
Yeah.
Wholly made up of Agamemnon goop. He is not guilty of a blood crime for killing his mother. And it also Aristotle.
This could be video, just because I don't know what to say, and my face is saying a lot.
Yeah. Again, a good example of how like these different ideas are showing up in our entertainment. And so another way that Aristotle puts it is that like women provide matter, like some kind of base. He actually talks about it as a cheese process. Ew. And that like the men's seed activates it, and that's what actually gives it form into an infant. There is some there are like some major differences. Like Hippocratic medicine actually leans more towards the idea that men and women in the womb are both pretty similar, and their natures can be really similar, but over time, like based on exposure, you might end up being more wet or more dry, and that will impact on how manly you are. Hippocratic medicine also, instead of Aristotle kind of arguing that like women are just a vessel, Hippocratic medicine is of the idea that like men and women contribute something, and they are like seeds. And depending on which seed overpowers the other one will give you a masculine woman or a wimpy guy and things like that. So a lot of interesting competitive ideas happening there.
Yeah. Okay. So they're telling men not to moisturize.
I don't know.
I'm not asking for a real answer with that, don't worry. But it's what it sounds like. Be dry, guys. Dryness equals manliness.
Yeah. And there's anyway. So again, even though the writings is claiming one thing, in practice this isn't necessarily happening. What else have we got? Even so, many, if not most, doctors and their patients continue to leave a place for the gods with healing. We said that. So leaving a place for the healing. If you actually read the original Hippocratic Oath, it opens with, I swear by Apollo, the physician, and Asclepius, and Hygeia, and Panacea, and all the gods and goddesses as my witnesses, that according to my ability and judgment, I will keep this oath and this contract. So, like, again, aligning themselves with this state institutionalized cults and cultural practices to legitimize themselves. Because again, there's no board certification doctors here. There's just
swearing to Apollo, the guy who says women are just a vessel.
And so this was kind of what I talked about in our last conversation, is like, okay, so what was Hippocratic medicine doing? What were these physicians doing to legitimize their practice, to get people to listen to them? So again, aligned with Asclepius. In Rome, they also do another thing where there's a wide variety of medical practitioners participated in the Quinta Quatris, which was a festival to Minerva, and it included a procession around the city of different craftspeople. So you would have so that was one way, is like you would visually show yourself off by parading around the city as a doctor
with your tools.
Along with weavers, fullers, dyers, teachers, painters, and engravers. Like, that's just a fun party.
I like that they're all aligned in that way. Like, along with, kind of artists, and craftspeople.
Yeah. And that's, again, in Rome, why it becomes kind of like this weird discipline, right? Because it does require knowledge. It does require, at least if you're practicing Hippocratic medicine, literacy. Along with physical training, and you're being paid for a service. So it's such a weird mix of intellectualism, and that's what poor people do, is work for a living.
Yeah.
And eventually, like later, you do have what they call armchair doctors. It's like, I just read all the medical texts, but I don't actually practice any. That's what kind of happens going into the medieval period, is like you have these people who continue to copy and comment and develop new ideas on medicine, but all on paper. They don't actually
Right.
go out and practice it on people. So
Yeah.
it's always an interesting discipline in that way.
Yeah. It's like researchers today, except that they do all of this practical stuff alongside that. But it's like it seems like the same idea, where you're not like a practicing physician, but you are, advancing things. But today it's like, well, that also requires you to actually go get practical like knowledge, though, too, not just the books.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why medical school takes so long.
Yeah.
Like,
there's a lot there.
There's a lot to do, including learning a foreign language, Greek and Latin. You have to learn Greek and Latin to practice medicine.
Back then.
Today.
Really?
Think about it. Think about how they talk about muscles. Your gluteus maximus. Right.
But not like, yeah. No, true. Yeah, true.
Yeah. So interestingly, body parts anatomy, Latin.
Yeah.
Medications, Greek.
Oh, I love that. That's so interesting to me, because I always find that my brain picks up on like etymological links now that I know, little bits of Greek and Latin. And so I always love kind of piecing those together when it comes to like scientific terms and stuff, which tend to use them. But I didn't know that there's like an actual kind of like line between what we use today.
Yeah. And so like what a lot of colleges will do is people who are on pre-med, in order to get students more involved in humanities, what classics departments will do is offer a medical terminology course, because they're going to have to learn all of these ancient terms in Greek and Latin. So that's a pretty common course offered by a lot of classics departments at like colleges and universities that are associated with like a medical school. So
I love that. That's fun. And I mean, it's just such, maybe because I'm an enormous nerd for etymology, but still, it's fun. Like, I would take that. No science otherwise, but that.
When you start to understand a Latin-based, like, English is so useless sometimes. Understanding a Latin-based language and learning Greek helps you comprehend so much more than just English will allow you to. And so that's a good reason to go learn dead languages, people. Yeah. It's useful.
Well, I mean, even the little, like I've not had the chance to learn Greek and Latin, but I have a brain that I am fairly certain now is autistic and picks out all of those things and finds the and I just like everything I see these days because of how much Greek and Latin I've taken in over this career, that like I swear, like every word now I'm like, oh my god, like I do this with plants. My friend all the time, and I'm just like, did you know that like what was it? Oh, philodendron. I was like, oh, that just means friend of trees. And it just occurred to me the other day looking into like a plant. I was like, just looking to buy something. I'm like, oh, philodendron just means friend of trees. And I just love that what little Greek I know can allow me to be like, oh, what a nerdy little thing I just learned.
Yeah. Hippopotamus, river horse. I love it.
Well, that's the best one. And that is why I maintain that the real river horses are the this is the dumbest, but that the horses that come when Arwen makes like an elvish prayer in the Fellowship of the Ring whilst she is carrying Frodo on horseback, and the Nazgul are nipping at their heels. And I won't pretend like I don't have that memorized, but I will not recite it here. But that elvish spell pulls in the river horses, and that's the true hippopotamus, because actual hippopotami do not, and that is me realizing that I also do Greek plurals when English wouldn't make sense, but yeah, are nothing like river horses, and I love that for them.
I'm pretty sure if people do want to hear you say that spell, you said it on the episode you came and talked about Spartacus with us.
Did I?
Yeah.
Because I've made this same dumb joke? Oh, wow, I'm cool. That means terrible.
I must have mentioned hippopotamus before, too. So, like, we're both guilty of it.
It's so sad that I've done that before. Okay, but speaking of etymology, does that mean that Hippocrates means like strong horse?
I think so. Right?
Great.
Hippo,
Strength
yeah.
force. Got it. And and Kratos. So
Yeah.
love it
Yeah.
for him. He's a
Yeah.
strong horse.
Yeah. And an Asclepiad, and apparently like anti-Persian. Who knew?
Even at cost, that feels like you're anti whoever,
Yeah.
it seems more appropriate at that time.
Yeah. Also, like, that doesn't seem very doctor-like.
No. But it does seem very Greek.
It does. It does for sure. Yeah. Okay. So since the last time I spoke, I learned about another way that Hippocratic medicine was actively differentiating itself from folk medicine and witchcraft. And so to get in that, humoral pathology, I've mentioned, it's these 4 humors, right? They kind of, for a long time, they only talked about 3 because they're like, but they want 4. They want 4 humors because that is a better balance than 3.
But Greek loved 3s. That's a surprise to me.
They did, but then this whole like hot, cold, wet, dry dichotomy, it really needs a 4th. And so black bile, no one really knows what black bile is. Like they're just making shit up at that point.
Yeah. This is where my English literature degree like melds with my classics degree in terms of like Victorian wild shit.
Yeah. Well, maybe you know this then, because like this was something I was amazed to learn. So humoral pathology and these 4 things, and it's not just, so you've got, it's tied to the seasons. Later in medieval Islamic medicine, they tie it to like particular constellations. And so like star readings were just as important to your health as like anything else in this system.
Oh, the zodiac girlies are loving that.
Yep. And legit, like those star charts matter. They obviously impact your health. So this remains so prominent that Carl Linnaeus, another father of taxonomy, used it to create this was just like infuriating to learn, to help taxonomize humans. That means, so he was saying in Systema Natura that there are 4 species of humans.
There we go.
Based on race.
Okay.
Very much suggesting that humans are somehow different species. And if they interbreed with each other, then they just create more defective types of humans.
Oh, great. Oh, he's the father of eugenics too.
He is. He did contribute to it. Yeah. You nailed it. Humoral pathology is used to help build ideas of eugenics and racial science.
Oh, great. Measuring those skulls as we always should.
And so humoral pathology then is these 4 humors, and you are considered healthy when they're in balance in your body, right? So if you get too much of one, or if one gets closed off and starts pooling around a body part, that's bad. And they also they're a dichotomy. They're opposites of each other. So if you were going to treat someone who, for instance, has a fever, you would use treatments that would cool the body. So like you take a bath, you eat cold foods. So it's this idea of you restore balance through the use of opposites. That's just the basic principle of it.
Yeah. And for a fever, that makes sense. And I imagine it's little else.
Again, it's like one of these things. It's like, okay, every once in a while.
Yeah.
They're doing things that make sense.
I mean, a stopped clock is wrong twice a day.
Exactly. And there are other approaches. So like there's a group of doctors called rationalists where they thought therapeutics were primarily based. So this is the rationalist approach. They're based on opposites, treatments that countered imbalances. Other approaches included empiricists. They sound fun because they just do everything by trial and error.
Oh, good. That's what you want with medicine.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then there's Methodists, and they were just more of like, we're going to be gentle about how we treat people. So they're the ones really promoting like walking and singing and rocking or swinging and a swing to like feel better. And it's like, I feel like I really would have wanted to be looked at by a Methodist.
Yeah. Like it feels like risky in the long term, but so much nicer in the short term.
Yeah. Yeah. And so again, it's like humoral pathology didn't like practice, like not everyone's doing the exact same thing. Not everyone's approaching medicine the exact same way. But this idea of treatment by opposites versus folk medicine is based on this premise of homeopathy, and homeopathy is pretty closely tied to sympathetic magic. The idea that you deal with something like attracts like. So really famously, like the evil eye is as a protective charm for the evil eye. One, it's blue because there's this cultural assumption that people with blue eyes are more likely to cast an evil eye.
I didn't know that. I love that.
So when you get a charm of it, it's usually blue. Like you can go to Greece or Turkey today and get one of these.
Everywhere. I love it.
Yeah, and it's fun because like what the idea is, like that charm would actually draw the evil eye to it. And there's some, sometimes there's just like little small beads and stuff. So I've heard like Greeks talk about how like if you lose the charm, that means that it no longer had the power to like take in the evil eye. So that's why you lose it. And so that's kind of how sympathetic magic works. And we see some of this idea, again, going back to Pliny and Cato, because folk medicine in general, it's based on this idea of homeopathy. So the idea that like affects like, a concept well recognized in discussions of sympathetic magic, like the evil eye. But it's also talked about with menstrual blood. So I forget who does. I think it's Pliny. Talks about how like menstrual blood is super dangerous. It will like wilt crops. It will. I know there's someone who's like talks about if a pregnant woman comes in contact with it, it could jeopardize her pregnancy. It could render men impotent. Like so dangerous. But also the cure for those things is menstrual blood and or like something of like that has a similar nature to it. Okay. So, according to Ripet, these are well-chosen description. Oh, who said it? I have to find it. Male writers like Pliny said, menstrual blood is a monstrous thing and a great evil. And it's because it was polluting and it could cause harm. But to make sense of the apparently paradoxical nature of menstrual blood as both contagiously corrosive and healing, it's necessary to appreciate 3 independent ideas. And I need to go back and say, this is Pauline Ripet's article that I've pulled from before. I've talked about. She wrote on Roman women, wise women, and witches. And she's the one who's like, okay, we have all of these literary descriptions of witches. What could that actually tell us about the practice of folk medicine based on these literary descriptions? So this nature of menstrual blood or other things that witches are using to treat things, the explanation of illness or harm comes from excessive flow or stagnation, both of which resulted in decay, withering, and wasting. That's not unlike some of the humoral pathology ideas in terms of like you can have too much of something's out of balance. But folk healing appears to have depended upon the idea of transference of illness and health-bringing factors between bodies. So health as an absence of illness, and you remove the impediments to health, then health remains. So like you kind of like the idea of like sucking poison out of or venom out of a bite. That's kind of the same idea. So instead of treatment by opposites, which is humoral pathology, the rationalist approach, folk medicine is all about using things of a similar nature to draw out what is causing harm. And so the theories themselves are opposite. And I think that it's interesting to look at as just another way that Hippocratic medicine was distinguishing itself from folk medicine.
Yeah. Can I bring up, okay, so this is a thing that you've just led me to start to ruminate on with that explanation of menstrual blood. So that idea that it is, like, I'm going to simplify for my point.
Yeah.
Like, it's basically both poison and curative. Right? So are you familiar with the Euripides play, I just covered it, and it's like one guy's very 3-letter name. So there's a Euripides play, which apparently the word will never come to me, even though I just looked up it. But anyway, it's the one where Creusa's son, she was raped by Apollo, and her son is the named character whose name I can't remember because his name is just literally the title of the play. It starts with an I, and I've lost it so completely. Thank you. Oh, it's just the fucking Ion. Jesus H. Christ. I appreciate it. Anyway, so in the Ion, there is this truly bizarre reference to Gorgon blood. And it's funny because I had to go through it when I wrote this big old piece on Medusa. And this Gorgon blood is so separate from the other mythological details of the Gorgons that it really feels like in my section of this book I called it the Phlegraean Gorgon, because the story is that this Gorgon in this play, it's said that this was a Gorgon killed during the Gigantomachy in southern Italy, instead, like basically separating this Gorgon from the Medusa of the Gorgons. But this Gorgon's blood is said to be both curative and poisonous. And it's like this one reference to a Gorgon's blood being anything like that. It doesn't really exist anywhere else. And now I'm like, oh shit, Euripides is playing with this idea, I assume. Like, that's so cool and makes it so much more interesting. And already the Ion is the most fascinatingly feminist play. So just to like add that, oh my god, it's so good. It's literally about how Apollo is a rapist and how PTSD from assault in women is real. It literally treats this woman's sexual assault by Apollo as the trauma that it would be. It's so good. It's still, had to be Greek at the end, and like, so it's wrapped up in a bow and Apollo isn't in trouble. But then it also has this reference to this blood, which then she wants to use to kill her son that she doesn't know is her son because he's working for Apollo. And it's this whole wild, incredible thing. But oh my god, it just makes me love Euripides even more, basically, to say like, oh no, there's almost no way he wasn't connecting to this idea.
For sure. I mean, and again, happens in medicine, right? Like, there are certain things that if you have too much of it, or if it's not treated or compounded in a certain way, it's poisonous and toxic to the human body. In other instances, it's chemotherapy. Right? Like, again, these ideas have we still are engaging with them in our medical practices today. There's just more rational science behind it, but those concepts don't go away, of like things that could cause harm can also be healing in some manner. So like, I'm not surprised that, again, it is really fun to see how playwrights are actually engaging with medical text as well, because you don't necessarily think about it that way, but well, and now I just can't get over it, because it's like this Gorgon that already is like this completely not like doesn't fit into any of the other Gorgon stories, and has this bizarre blood that we've otherwise never heard of. And to have that link, I'm just now obsessed and wish I could have written it into that book. Well, and I mean, that makes sense, because Gorgon's eyes are also apotropaic. They're kind of, I imagine they're similar to the evil eye, and same as giant penises by the Romans. They're somehow apotropaic. The whole
Gorgon face is apotropaic, like just the Gorgonion as a concept. So to have that.
And I mean, if you think about it, that's how they operate, right? They assume that you are bringing evil to it, and so you fight evil with evil, you fight fire with fire, is kind of the idea. So I thought that was just kind of an interesting thing. I had noticed that, again, in practice, people were using both, because people will do whatever it takes to regain health, to maintain their health. Like, that just doesn't change.
I'm not going to get over this idea of menstrual blood being so like poisonous too, like, and corrosive, because it's like, did no one just think like we could check? Like, no one thought like, it's not hard. Like, we've all got, uteruses in our lives, even if they, we don't respect the human attached to them. Like, why did anyone test it?
I mean, it's such an like menstrual blood is, again, it's one of these features of a human body with a uterus, a functioning uterus produces menstrual blood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually not harmful to the woman herself.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. So that means, but blood in general, like you can't go and you can't go to a sanctuary, some place dedicated to gods or immortality, because if you introduce that, it pollutes it, right? So menstrual blood is polluting, but
Right.
women are immune to that pollution, or they're inured against it. And that's also, we tie a lot to who was responsible for handling the dead and preparing the dead in ancient Greece. It's women, because they're already polluted to some extent that they can handle the miasma of a dead body. They can handle mortality in a way that the gods or men are not predisposed to.
It's so fascinating because it's simultaneously like so empowering and so reductive and gross. And like, it's like it's this recognition that we're saying women, we do mean people with a uterus, especially now more than ever, we do mean that. But like, when it comes, it's important to say women in the ancient world, because it was coming with this very heavy burden of like existence. So, but like they were able to recognize that uteruses held this like enormous power that they would never be able to harness, and all they could do is like use, like really just dehumanize to the point of being able to utilize this uterus outside of its human body. But at the same time, like, it's so, I don't know, it's so wild to me. It reminds me of, and I think this is another timely thing to say in this episode, but of this, I saw a TikTok the other day where a person, I'm going to assume they were a trans person based on this context, but that they were replying to a TikTok video of a woman, a woman who had like asked with very, compassionate sincerity, asked for someone to explain why conservatives are so fucking afraid of trans people. And this person's response will live with me forever. And I feel like it's kind of what I've just never been able to fully put into words, but like why I push the way I do in this show. But it's that the conservatives, and by that we do mean the patriarchal structure, is so afraid of trans people because they can't control them in the way that the patriarchy has learned to control women. Because they have used everything you're saying is this like these 2,500 years of finding this method of control, right? The dehumanization, the fact that people with a uterus are just incorrect men, that they can just be used and controlled. And so when we have trans people who are, say, women but don't have a uterus, or men but don't have a penis, they are this enormous threat to the patriarchy because they cannot be controlled by that patriarchy. And it's why white women who are so fully deep into the patriarchy are, just as against trans people as the men. And I mean, obviously beyond white women, but we all know that they're the biggest problem. And like, yeah, it's just so wild to me. And it just is like, yes, all of that is so true about the patriarchy and conservatives and their utter fear of trans people because they cannot be controlled. But it is also so in line with the struggle of women for the last 2,500 years, because we are all struggling against the patriarchy. Like, literally, it's not about, who's got a uterus or who doesn't. It's about this struggle against the patriarchy. Oh, yeah. Anyway, you're just giving me all the origins of it, and I love and hate it.
I know. Yeah. Which I'm finally to the whole focus of our talk, and we're only an hour and a half.
I know.
Was like, where do women fit into all of this Hippocratic medicine nonsense? And I've talked about we've mentioned it a few times. It's like, all right, women are inferior bodies to men because of the uterus, and you know what the solution to all of their problems is? Have sex and get pregnant.
Well, naturally, because then they're of use.
Yeah.
Because that's the only time when women are of use to the patriarchy is when they're full of another baby.
Well, that's how you stop the bleeding.
Yeah, well, of course. And that's why that's the right way to be. Because once you're filled up with the baby, you're not going to bleed. I want to scream all the time.
It's just like people just, it's like, and considering the reaction to Pixar's, what is it? Going Red, turning that movie.
Oh, yeah. I forget what it was, but yeah. The period movie.
Some things have not changed.
Yes. No, but yes, like it's so wild. And it just, everything, the more I learn about this stuff and the ancient world, but also up until today, is like, it's just what stands out so much is this bizarre lack of curiosity. This bizarre disinterest in examining a body that is different from your own. Like, why are you so afraid of learning? Mm-hmm. Like, why are these men, this patriarchal structure? Like, I mean, I know why ultimately when I phrase it like the patriarchal structure, because if they know too much about women, if they humanize women and recognize that no matter your gender or sex, like we are all fucking human beings, then like they lose that control. You cannot control a population that you treat as equal to your own. And so the more, you know, and I mean, it's just so much more nefarious now that because white women have been granted this, like just the tier below the men, that they now will uphold the patriarchy against, you know, marginalized people of all types. And it's just like, it's so fucking wild. And I guess I could just keep talking about this forever, but it's just fucking fucked up.
Yeah. And so that's why Hippocratic medicine, and I have a tentative title at the top, like Women's Patience with Hippocratic Medicine. We'll get into the word patience too.
Yeah.
Is that not only have you stigmatized a folk medical practice that women are heavily involved in, you're also using your ideas of medicine to define the female body as inferior. Not just in it's like more likely to get illness, but saying that it's incapable of thinking in a rational manner. So it is intentionally trying to not only delegitimize folk medical practices, and we see this in the language of the epigraphy, it's trying to say that women are not capable of even rational medicine. And that's what you see in the epigraphy, or a lot of like references to women to Medica is like, despite her gender, or she practiced like a man. Like there is this element of like,
it's the dehumanization.
She can do this despite her sex.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for listening. Please check out more on the Memory Collective, my and Michaela's new collective of people doing interesting stuff for the public. If you want to learn more about history, specifically how history has been impacted by the patriarchal structure in which we live. collectivemem.com. Again, it is linked in the episode's description. And check out our first 2 podcasts joining this podcast network within the Memory Collective, Sweet Bitter and Movies We Dig. We are going to be bringing you as much as possible because I just think that this is really important stuff, and I can't wait to be a part of sharing it more widely. Let's Talk About Myths Baby is written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Michaela Pengowish is the producer, the Hermes to my Olympians, and the co-founder of this new Memory Collective. Select music by Luke Chaos. The podcast is part of my own goddamn podcast network, the Memory Collective. Listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and sign up for our newsletter where we will be sharing information about the Memory Collective as we have it. mythsbaby.com/newsletter. Thank you all so fucking much. Rage against the goddamn patriarchy. Burn this shit to the ground and punch a Nazi while you're at it. I am Liv and I love this shit.